Ain't too bad. Doctor sings his songs again. Last so please my friend. The pain got you here. They don't you know I'm the song. I'm a train call city of New Orleans. I'll be gone 500 miles away. I'll be
Right, so lines, yeah, they don't have some as good, like I used to like, I would go so good before, I get a shot.
Yeah.
Right, just. Got a good deal on that? I rather, it was like, I mean, I'll put this whole thing is the Dollar Tree is considered, they're also gonna raise it again. Yeah. Well, they have like $10 anyway. You eat nicer. So you're right, so I'm, and yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, at events, I go to stuff, I see that. Yeah. Yeah, like,
All around me are the faces, all around me faces, writing down for the day, so going nowhere, going nowhere. Their tears are filling up their eyes, no expression, no expression. My head out, drops of the soul, no tomorrow, no tomorrow. And I find it kind of funny, I find it kind of sad. The dreams that kitchen dying are the best I've ever had. I find it hard to tell you, I find it hard to take. When people run in circles, it's a very bad world. Bad world. Children waiting for the day to be happy birthday, happy birthday. And I feel about every child should sit in the sun, sit in the sun. Went to school and I was very no one, no one. Hello, teacher, tell me what's my next. The truth when much of dying was a silent home. Find it hard to tell you, I find it hard to tell you. People are on the face, it's a long Lord, in your window, that word.
I don't think that thing's ever been correct. Oh, I thought I was late. Yeah.
Go back home. It's all up to you. Get your pencil to so on your best roll. Like with chains and rollers, I turn on inside out. Asphalt's on the cloud. Walk here you go. And my cup some more. Then I realize I thought to the sky, the trouble is while I'm here. Looking at fear, won't go my dog. Tell me time to know. I had to walk it out. And inside the car, so first to get it right. Please can tell the lie. I'm wearing as a shoe. Walking through the blue. I walked up down the road, some side thing, no one is ready. I see the street, I go in the ground. Down every trail, I go down, our senses in their lives. Face on my roof, I know, all and shoot down. I walk through town, still singing in blues, but grateful for the blue. Noticing the views with sunshine on my face. Without looking at the place, wearing out the shoes. Walking through the blue, in my way. Got time for at least another. It's that slowly, I was a fox feeling lonely. You on and you stop this. The time of the phone singing. Yeah, summer sun back so quickly. As we at the time, your love hit me. Weary skies and sultry sky, because of how it shows with your eyes. But it's not.
That's insane. That's just offensive.
It's a sign. Yeah, freckles on every I to speculate the God himself because or respond. Shapes like puzzles on the crazy like a strike, but it's thoughts like this that catch my trouble every day. Growing some shores and my scan the rain. Oh, guys, so they will see us again. So comes down now. I'll say come down. I'll say I try my best to leave you. So your machine right there, persistent beating, sounded it up. So right with you when I fly. You'll see the shore, stars and notice these oars will go. Those kind of mist of God. They will see us waiting on the side. Mark with the yes. You guys did.
All right, well, thank you, Matt Hand. All right, let's give it up to Matt again. You will be hearing more from Matt at the back end of the meeting, as is at least one of the Lyceum ways that I learned about through my research and was going to talk to you about tonight. But I wanted to just be clear that tonight is the first of what hopes to be a series of these lectures. We have several lined up each month. And I'm glad to say that I have people who have offered to be lecturers. So I'm the maiden voyage here. And thank you. And hopefully we'll see how it goes. I mean, there's a lot of stuff to share with you guys tonight. But I want to start by talking about the title of this talk. All right. Civic engagement, what's possible when a community connects. Now, that's going to be the focus, but really, as you'll find, this is really, you can turn this into a question. What's possible when a community connects? And we're going to talk about that. And I hope that you have some ideas, because this is it's called a lecture. But oftentimes lectures can be quite boring, a bit droll, and quite honestly, unless you're really interested in the topic, you might zone out a little bit. So this lecture is modernized from the traditional lyceums, which were hundreds of years old, of course. So you might have a chance, it's wrecked. You might have a chance to do things that community members do often, face to face, together in the same place. All right, we're going to share ideas. We're going to talk about some things. Certainly, if there are questions, we can talk about those too. So I hope it's not just a learning experience, but also kind of a social experience. So my first question, and I did ask you guys to take some index cards just for note-taking purposes. This is not a homework assignment. This is not graded. Don't worry. I'm curious about, and if you can pop one off the top of your head, what do you think when you think of an engaged community? What do you have in mind? And maybe you lived in a place at one time that you would consider engaged, or maybe you're seeing things happen in Flemington or historically in Flemington that are examples of that. So I'm curious, right out of the gate, audience members, guests, you guys are my guests tonight. I don't have a special guest. He's my special guest. Usually the Lyceums will have a guest or two, but because I had so much to accomplish tonight, you're my guest. So welcome, guests. So guests, what do you think an engaged community looks like? Can we get some ideas? And this is a civic classroom. I'm going to keep some notes. Okay. So could you tell me, anyone? Maybe I'll start with Matt. He was bold enough to do this. He was bold enough to get up here and play music for me. So Matt, what is like an element of an engaged community? What do you think?
I mean, visually looks like, I think people outside interacting is a cornerstone. I don't think we're much of a community if we're inside our little boxes all the time.
Thank you. You'll have to forgive my handwriting.
It's okay.
What else? Anybody have any ideas? Rick?
So people are working together.
People helping each other, working together. Other ideas?
Talking about stuff that's deeper than purpose level with your friends, family, neighbors, what lives there.
Thank you, Dave. Deeper conversation. So this is a good starting point. Because you know what it might look like, feel like, seem like, but I want to talk to you tonight about what is possible. All right, what is possible, and we're going to look back through history. right? And, in a basic kind of thing, community engagement, it's volunteer, it's discussion, it's partnerships, it's outreach, it's all this, all right? Now, the opposite of community engagement is what we see in the headlines. And these are real stories. You don't have to read the whole thing to know something's up, something's going on. And, it hits a little close to home with a story like this when I read this. And I addressed this at a council meeting a few months ago. Volunteerism has diminished tremendously at the local level. And it's hard to find people to volunteer. And this specifically was first responders, firemen and women, right? Those are volunteer, most of New Jersey, volunteer fire departments. It's hard to find those people. So we got to think about ahead of this, what's going on right now. And it's kind of strange to me personally that this is happening. So I want to tell you something about this place, okay? And just so you know, I love history and I really love a great story. And the Lyceum was all about that. It was about that. And let me back this up and ask you folks, has anybody ever heard of a Lyceum movement before I had mentioned it, before maybe I posted something somewhere? Okay, one person raised their hand. Can't see this at home, but I was sitting at a council meeting and oftentimes get a lot of paperwork, things passed to us. And the director of the FCP had given us these walking tour brochures, and I'm waiting for the council meeting to begin, and I'm just kind of leafing through it. And I'd seen this pamphlet before, but I neglected to turn it on the reverse and look at what was here. And it said on this walking tour that you can go on yourself with the additional help of the walking tour guide. It said that this place was known as the Reading Academy. And for the Flemington Lyceum, it was an early site for that academy, and the building served as a lyceum, which was a center for public lectures and concerts, and also a meeting place for the temperance movement, which is interesting. In 1922, the borough purchased that building, and now we have our fire department in this adjoining building. All right, that's what was here. Okay, so when I read that, I said, okay, I gotta find out this stuff. So I went crazy. I went nuts researching. And what I'm going to show you is the product of my research, and I'm going to look, there's a lot, but I'm going to try to shrink this down to something manageable for you all. But I think what we need to understand is thousands of years ago, we'll go back to Athens, there was a Lyceum, right? And it was Aristotle's school, okay? And there was a garden next to this Lyceum building. And oftentimes Aristotle, his students, all these philosopher types, they would go on these little walk and talks and start talking about philosophy, right? Big questions of the day. And it became, a real center of pursuits, of, arguments, entertainments, all those things, and a commitment to some intellectual kind of forays. Now, let's fast forward to 1824. George Birkbeck was a professor in England, and he started London Mechanics Institute. This is the first of the, you could call them somewhat modern Lyceum. Now, this institute was actually less community and citizen driven than it was government driven. So the London Mechanics Institute was this sort of expanded government thing that in 1824 started in England. And in 1826, across the ocean, in Millbury, Massachusetts, the first American Lyceum was founded. Josiah Holbrook was a teacher, an intellect, a guy who wanted people to learn about things, science and mechanics and chemistry, all that cool stuff. And he was committed to this, and he started this first Lyceum. And by 1834, growing out of Massachusetts, the greater New England region, you had, Connecticut joining, New Hampshire. And by the 1830s, the late 1830s, I should say, we got this area now. New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey. The Lyceum movement is growing, expanding, and very popular. It reached down south a little bit to Virginia, Carolinas, Georgia, but it was quite prolific in the Midwest. So between the 40s and the 50s, 1840s and 50s, the Midwestern states, Ohio, Illinois, Indiana, adopted their lyceums, and it just spread. You know, it was harder in more of the prairie places and the places that were extremely rural and remote, but it took off. People were curious to talk about ideas and maybe have arguments and debates and learn some things. So I went on a deep dive with all this, and a lot of the articles I read had referenced this book, The American Lyceum, Town Meeting of the Mind by Carl Bode, which I believe was published in 1956, and then the second edition in 68, I believe. Anyway, I looked all over for this thing online, I couldn't find it. I did find it on Amazon, but it was extremely expensive because it's out of print. And then I was fortunate enough to find a used and rare bookstore in Long Island and Sag Harbor, Long Island. I ordered that puppy up, and I just want to, just a little aside, support your local bookstore, please. All right, they have rare, genuine books and stuff that it's just amazing what you'll find. So this book I got for a whopping $20, out of print, and some strange person like me is the only one looking for it apparently. What did I learn from this book? I learned a lot, and I wanted to distill what the Lyceum was, and they were focused on the civic classroom. You can call this that. They were open to all, not just the elites. It was lecture-centered learning. I love this. Politics, according to Bode, was barred with ostentatious firmness. How about that? Reform-friendly without being radical. Community-owned institutions. Okay, again, it was community-based, and the community took ownership of it. It was not a company. It was not a government institution. It was a community-agreed institution. There became a national network with local impact. They had presidents in New York City, Chicago, and they would have little nodes of influence in places, even out here in Old Vernon County. The main thing that I knew the Lyceum from in my teacher training was that it did boost public school development. It was very supportive. It wanted to push after the Civil War public education. So every state now has that guarantee. It's a law. Every state has to provide a public education. So they were spearheading these ideas that everybody gets an education. Doesn't matter. It was a training ground for orders. They viewed mental exercise as entertainment. There was moral uplift at its center, and of course, once mass media really exploded, it declined. So here it is, 1834. Now that was the peak of the popularity of Lyceum. So this Flemington Lyceum building, that's it. And I want to give a tremendous thank you to the Hunterdon Historical Society, who is a wealth of information and extremely helpful. And I am just enlightened more by what I was able to get from them and see, and it's amazing, some of this stuff. So that's what this building looked like. It's not a firehouse, but that's what it looked like in 1834, and as you know, in 1922 it was purchased and changed into what we have now. Hunterdon County Democrat in 1954 had an article about the Lyceum that was from 1854, and I'll zoom in and I'll read this for you. It's absolutely fascinating. In 1854, the country villages were lacking in cultural advantages. The people felt the need for suitable places for entertainments and concerts, as well as discussion of public issues. It was to fill the need for a place where debates and discussions could be held and entertainment staged by local as well as visiting lecturers and entertainers that the Flemington Lyceum was built. It stood and still stands at the head of Court Street at the junction of what is now Park Avenue and Court Street Extension. Among the builders and prime movers in erecting the Lyceum were Charles Bartles and John C. Hopewell, founders of the Hunterdon Bank, which in 1865 was taken into the national banking system as the Hunterdon County National Bank of Flemington. After serving for a time, the purpose for which it was erected, the Lyceum was transformed into a dwelling or dwellings for two families. It was rather the worse for neglect when in the early 20s it was bought by the Borough of Flemington and transformed into the firehouse and Borough Hall, a purpose it still serves admirably. So, 1954, how about that? So I love old maps, and there's a ton of these old maps from the 1800s. All right, if you ever get a chance, just take a field trip over there for yourself. It's amazing. Every Tuesday, just email the secretary. You can get in there, curious about anything. So I found these old maps. Well, I should say the Historical Society alerted me to them and showed them to me. you'll see here that there's our Lyceum, where the arrow's pointing to, where we are. Stated on the map as such. Now, the road, the street, Lyceum in a later map is noted, the last name was Murphy. These are, you might recognize some of these last names if you really look close. But Court Street was not Court Street, it's called Lyceum Street. And when I learned about that, I was like, you gotta be kidding me. Are you serious? Wait, they had a street and a building. That to me says how important that is. I mean, that's a big deal. I love this map. This is a gorgeous map, hand sketched map from 1883. I zoomed in a bit, but you can see this is the Lyceum building. And if you compare it to the the sketch that I showed you before, that's it. That's the Lyceum building. And you see the courthouse, right? And then that's the park. All right. Some of these old houses haven't changed a bit, but the Lyceum did. And that's what it looked like in 1922 when it was purchased. Okay, they got the fire department in there. It has since changed its profile, of course, since trucks are much larger now. So, you know, you're putting like a Model T in there at that point. So that history struck me, and I was really hoping to find any meeting minutes, evidence of whatever was here. And the historical side, unfortunately, didn't have that. I'm sure we could do a deeper dive in it, and I was, you know, in doing this research, it's just I didn't have time to say to, hey, all of Flemington, does anybody have stuff from Lyceum that was here? But what I was able to find, and it's local, the Stockton Lyceum Society has a minute book, and I was able to leaf through that. I'm going to show you some of the stuff that was in it. The meeting minutes, and the structure of the meeting, and how they did it, and the things they did in the meeting. All right, they had a lot of like debates, but they had judges for the debates. And they affirmed them or negated them, but they decided who basically won the debate. And it was pretty neat. And there was audiences for this. People like this stuff. Again, this is entertainment. But it's absolutely fascinating, the discussions they had, the topics they talked about. So I want to show you a little bit. What I love first, I'll point out, is how about this handwriting? Wow, right? I mean, that's beautiful. Okay. That is absolutely gorgeous. And the Stockton Lyceum in 1888, they had an April 6th meeting. And I'll read that just so you get a sense of what was going on. So the Lyceum was called to order by the president. Then there was singing. There's music. Minutes were read and accepted. Reading by Susie Fritz and recitation by Reginald Walrath. He not being prepared, the recitation was omitted. So he gets called out right away. The being next in order, 3 judges were chosen: Willie Wilson, Lizzie Jenger, Mr. Lambert, Henry Holcomb, which maybe is a connection to the Holcomb Fisher funeral. Henry Holcomb not being present, Mr. Rittenhouse was chosen back instead. After quite a discussion by the chief, the students, and 3 assistants, the decision was given to the judges, who decided 2-1 in favor of the negative. After the general discussion, it was given in favor of the affirmative. Now, sometimes in the notes, they would share what the debate was. Other times you just say, like, in general, here's how it shook out. Because I imagine keeping up with those minutes was a bit difficult, right? This is cool. This is another entry in the minute book. I'm just going to read a couple things, and I think this is tremendously just illuminating. In the place of the regular debate, the Reverend Mr. Snyder gave a talk about the wonders of the moon. Afterwards, a vote of thanks was given to him for his kindness. How about that?
Moon rules.
There you go. Who can argue with that? This is another little interesting sentence. Where was it? Now you get to see what they're debating about. So it was then decided to change the subject for debate to resolve that there is more wealth there is more wealth east of the Mississippi than west of it. Interesting. Questions were answered by those to whom they were assigned, except Willie Wilson, Reginald Walrath, and Susie Fritz. The journal was read by the editress. On motion, it was decided that she, the editress, shall have 3 assistants to furnish contributions for the journal and also take up a penny collection for the purpose of getting a scroll book for the society. It's pretty neat stuff. And watch this. Here's a question that is totally 1800s. The question chosen for the previous week was resolved that idleness is the cause of vice. Resolved that city life was preferable to country life. Interesting. Resolved. The question resolved that the farmer is more content than the businessman was very well discussed. The decision was then given to the judges, who decided 2-1 in favor of the affirmative.
Then
Other-
both can attest to that.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing what they this was an agricultural region and still they're like, yeah. Is Washington more consequential than Columbus? Resolved that nature has more to do with the formation of character than education. Resolved that early marriages were producers of more happiness than marriages protracted later in life. Wow, right? I think we could have this. We could have this discussion in 2025. We could. That's nature versus nurture right there, right? As far as the marriage thing, I don't know. I mean, I guess it's up to the man. So, what do you think would be some questions? Let's, there's some that might be timeless, but do you think there's questions that we're wrestling with right now in our moment that would be good topics for a Lyceum society? Like, let's just pretend one existed right now. What would the topic? What would they talk about? Think about that, right? We can talk about a lot of stuff. I go back to the first slides and say, hey, what's going on with the loneliness epidemic? There's a discussion. Where are we talking about these things? Where are we doing this?
Social media.
Social media. That's it. And I got to tell you, hardly a Lyceum, right? I mean, there's some good stuff. People can connect. You find your people, and you find your interests. You find support systems. But it's a double-edged sword. It's a gift, but it could go either way. So let's review. In the beginning, I talked to you about. I did mention that I love history and I really enjoy a great story, and that was a lot of what the Lyceums were about. They would have storytellers. Talk about the moon, right? Expanding on any subject they wanted to, but I want to take us away from what's all this crazy stuff that's going on. And I want to talk to you about a study that was done and published in March, not too long ago. It's called the Connection Opportunity. It's a 2-year study by an institution called the Moore and Comp. And according to the study, here's some numbers to ponder. 70% of Americans feel a sense of responsibility to connect with people from different backgrounds and beliefs. 66% of Americans believe that they can learn a lot from interacting with people who are different than them. Those are majorities. We can't get that many people to agree on a lot of topics. But this is what people think. That gives me some hope. And that tells me there's some of this Lyceum spirit might exist. Now, I want to tell you a story, okay? And I'm going to link this back to the Lyceum. But first, I have to thank my mom, because I was feverishly texting her for 2 weeks. Anytime I thought of a question, I had to get my facts straight. So a lot of this information was from my mother. And I want to talk to you about a story because these people are very important to me and to Flemington. All great stories have tremendous characters, great characters. And I want to introduce you to Vincent and Grace. Vincent Mina was from the southern region, right above Sicily, called Reggio Calabria. And if you know your Italian history, you know that anything south of Rome, the kingdom, just impoverished. Nobody had money, right? And Calabria was one of the most destitute. So Vincent Mina in the 19 teens, decided his family was leaving. And Grace Carolla lived in Italy. She's a little northern, Naples. Still, the family had to leave this poverty. And during that era, 1900s, there was a massive immigration because of reasons like this. So Vincent came in through Canada, Grace came in through Ellis Island. And if you have a keen eye, that uniform is from around 1917, 1918, during World War I. Now, there was an act of 1918 that allowed, they call them aliens, to serve in the United States Army in World War I and get their citizenship. And they took away some the difficulties, you know, the requirements. Because the thinking was, if you're willing to fight for this country, we should give you your citizenship. And that's how you became a citizen. Grace did the Ellis Island route. She lost a sister with pneumonia through that process, unfortunately. But these two characters also, you must realize that. Hold on, I gotta put my notes. I had this all planned. Sorry. That's what I have to say. So, you have these great characters, in my opinion, but all great stories also have a plot. And there's something that happens in a story. Once you get all the background information about your characters, which I gave you, there's an inciting event that kicks off the story, gets everything going. And for these two, they made the choice, the families made the choice to leave. Now, we call that in the literature classroom the call to adventure, based on Joseph Campbell's monitor. We are called to adventure in a great story. So the plot moves. It is allowed to unfold. Another aspect of a great story is setting. And there's no greater setting, in my opinion, than Flemington. These two met when they left Italy. And they started a family. Made more characters. And this picture on the left, that's Grace. And on the right of her is Mary Mina and her brother, Peter. Mary Mina was my grandmother. So those were my great grandparents on my mother's side. Well, they started this family, and I have to thank Mayor Caro. She texted me this clipping she had about my great grandfather right there. And he started the Flemington Floral Company, which is still here. He started that in 1923. And that was, I mean, they were the big deal flower place. All right. And if you've been around Flemington for a long time, and you know some of these folks, you know, I've had people come up to me and say, oh my gosh, I worked there in high school, you know, I knew your great aunts and uncles, and oh, your Uncle Tony, he was amazing. You know, tons of people know them. And it's absolutely incredible that, you know, here we are in this setting. And this place still exists. Now, the coolest thing about Flemington Floral is it was a family business from the start. It's only had two families owning it. There's the person who owns it now, the father is the second owner. There's two families. A small town, family-owned business that's been here for over 100 years. Is that community engagement? I think so. So my grandmother became Mary Fitz eventually, and she's here. And I don't know if you can see that. Here's this young man. That's my Uncle Richard. And I had two uncles, Uncle Richard, Uncle Vince named after great grandfather, and my mom. So those are characters that continue. But there's something you need to know. Another thing that a story has to have is a conflict. You can't have a story without conflict. I don't want to know a story without conflict. Now I'm telling you about this immigrant who came here, started his own business. But it wasn't without its difficulties. There was a time when he needed a loan. He went to all the banks. And he was denied at every turn. Because, I mean, come on, this guy's coming in, he's got a weird little accent, I don't know. So at various times in our history, we know we've had, you know, a sentiment, a nativist sentiment, and he experienced that firsthand, that conflict. But also he turned that conflict, as frustrating as it was for him, into what I think is the most powerful example of community engagement I've ever heard. I grew up hearing stories about him, and one of the stories I was told is not only did he start this business and become extremely successful, he also helped other immigrants. He helped them learn how to drive, and he helped them learn how to read, because he understood the importance of that. maybe from that experience, I'm speculating. So great stories have conflicts. You got to get through, right? So also, I'm just gonna fast forward because I got to connect this all, right? So on the left side, that young little guy, that's me, obviously. And that's my mom. And that's one of the greenhouses of Flemington, Florida. And this is just this past week. And this was not planned. 100%. When my friend sent me the picture, said, dude, you gotta get your rose. I'm like, huh? Of all times to do that? So, and I gotta credit my son Quincy for taking I think it's a good picture. And again, my mother, this wealth of information about my family. But this is a legacy. All great stories have themes. And it's hard to figure out what the theme of a story is sometimes. And the theme is the lesson. What do we take from all this? So I had to write this one down because it's too much for me to remember. I couldn't memorize this. But I want to bring it back to the Lyceum movement because I think that's what this is ultimately about. So the Lyceum movement believed that communities thrive when ordinary people gather to talk and learn together. That history lives here on these grounds. But the spirit of Lyceum was not just confined to the building that stood here. That spirit lived around kitchen tables, along sidewalks, in shops and stores, and through the quiet work of neighbors helping neighbors. My great-grandfather was an immigrant who accomplished big things despite many challenges. I know he cared about the community around him because he taught others like him how to drive and how to read and how to write. He built a business, a family business from the ground up. He was undeniably the embodiment of the American dream, and he left behind a legacy that exists to this day. He didn't have any official title, but to me, this man embodied perfectly the Lyceum ideal, that education and civic engagement are everyone's responsibility. Tonight, I hope that if you learn at least one thing, is that the legacy of Flemington Lyceum is very real. But a question I have for all of you is this: how can we revive this movement here in some small way? How can we as a community reignite that torch and bring light to the civic classroom once again? And I thank you for being with me here tonight. And Matt, you're going to take us away with the music. And that's one thing you should know: the Lyceum in Stockton began with music and ended with music. So you're free to hang. I've got some snacks, water, veggies, cookies, and I got some cookies from the Town Bakery. And that's it, folks. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Good job. Good job.
Thank you.
I like it.